Thank you very much for joining us. What a wonderful day it is here. I'm here in sunny Auckland. The sun is shining. I'm aware, though, that not all of us are able to go outside. So thank you very much from wherever you are for joining us. Hope you're all staying safe. It's wonderful to have you join us today as part of our ongoing knowledge sharing brown bag sessions. Today's one is going to be around maturity matrix and how we're using it with some of our customers and how they're using it to support some of their activities, engaging where they are along their data and analytics roadmap. Of course, I am talking from Auckland, as I said, part of the New Zealand branch of Altis. We've been around for 22 years. We've got offices, of course, around the world, some in Australia, some in Victoria, some in the UK. It's lovely that we can all be talking together so easily over this Zoom. I'm a bit of a novice at Zoom, so if I mess up some of the Zoom, just let me know. So yes, I'm Alex. I'm part of the New Zealand team. I run the New Zealand business, of course, for those that know me. Today's agenda, we're going to talk about the maturity matrix, and then what I'm particularly talking about, but we'll talk about a couple of different versions of a maturity matrix or a maturity curve and how that can help. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the current state and having a bit of time first before you go into a maturity matrix session to understand what your current state issues are, so that you can then, and what your objectives are, so that you can then, when you're in that maturity matrix session, keep that as part of the overall mindset that what are we trying to achieve as we go along our roadmap. Then as you gauge that future state and the high level roadmap from that matrix, how do you then go about turning those into next steps and tangible outcomes? Cool. So when I talk about a maturity matrix, everyone's got a slightly different conversation for it. I'm more referring to this spider web type thing here that we've got in front of you. I find this a powerful way. This one is the open source Mike 2.0 maturity matrix. You can download this from the web, and it is a wonderful tool that has a very holistic view of how you are doing in the data and analytics space and all of the things around it. We're going to get into this in more depth, of course, but a few things to highlight. This is a holistic view, so it's got a number of different areas that are associated. It's not just a people, process, and culture. It is all of those things around it: data governance, data quality, every big data pieces associated with semi-structured, geospatial, all of those things are important. You'll notice on the right-hand side, there are more of those people and cultural and process type pieces. And on the left-hand side are more of those technology pieces that support your ongoing endeavors as an organization or your customers' endeavors. What's important to also see is that you can have different lines here associated with it. You can have your current state, in this case highlighted by that lovely watermelon red of Altis, with the future state in the blue. We'll talk about this more in a minute. Before you have a session around that maturity matrix, what I find important is to actually have a session with your team, ideally with some of your core team in your BI and data strategy areas, as well as some outside stakeholders and some business people, come together and talk about data and analytics and where you are, what the pain points are, where the obstacles are, and where are some of the good points, of course, as well. Those things are important to discuss as a group before you will talk about maturity, because it's important to understand where those things are and what problems people are facing in a robust conversation up front. I find a session of around 2 hours first to whiteboard things. People put things on post-it notes and throw it up on the wall and get all those things out in the open is a great way to facilitate getting those current pain points out together. We facilitate those sessions often and they're great fun. You can then, if you don't uncover enough or there's some more that needs to be dug into, have further ones which I find is a great lead into the maturity matrix sessions. Now, we talked about the spider one just a moment ago. This, and we'll get back to in a minute. There are other maturity curve, in this case, a maturity curve. This is the Microsoft Analytics maturity curve. These are all playing a part for organizations. These all have a functional use, and not one is not necessarily better than the others. This one in particular focuses on 3 areas: people and culture, processes, and technology. It isolates it down to those 3 core pillars, and you gauge yourself across those 3, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not quite as holistic as the other one, but functionally this one can be quite a nice way of getting your messaging out. So for organizations, it's important to understand what sort of works well for getting your message across, because a lot of the outcome of this is you want, or what we see works well, is a tool that allows you to have easy conversations across the business and be able to use it as a tactical tool to be able to make decisions about where you need to change your program of work. What is important is also understanding your key objectives, not just your current state pain points, but also what some of your key objectives are. So for example, here I'm using a bit of a Microsoft architecture, though this of course applies to AWS or Snowflake or your on-prem world as well. I'll just use an example here. And so for an organization, it might be that some of your objectives that you're trying to achieve are things like a single customer view, or having a modern data platform where you've got structured and unstructured data that you can pull in there. Maybe it's around reducing some of your ETL time so that you're able to actually get results to your users faster, or enabling more self-service, both at a data level and at a reporting level, an analytics level. Maybe you need to get some real-time elements in there, or these days much more around ensuring that you've got good data privacy and making sure that only the people who've got the ability to look at that data and should look at that data, accessing that data and doing things with it in the right way, and you've got auditability around it. If you've got any questions in that space, of course, we've got our Chief Security and Data Officer who's building a great web of detail around how to support you in understanding your data privacy processes. It's wonderful. So understanding these objectives helps you also to then use that maturity curve to understand the components that you need to build on to be able to deliver on these objectives and overcome those pain points that you did in your current state. So these are 2 workshops that I think you should have first before your maturity curve session, but they're very powerful to then all come together with the same message across it. Then in your future state, it's around, and we'll get to the spider one again in a minute. If we look at this Microsoft Analytics maturity curve, it's around making sure it's a practical journey point. Your future state doesn't necessarily mean that you go to become an analytical master. It's around practically where can you get to on your analytics journey and with what steps to get there. So if we look back at our future state, our spider chart here, what's important is, I think, is that, and when we do this with some people in some organizations, their instant reaction is to make everything a 5. We'd love to be fantastic at everything. And that sort of sounds great, but practically that's probably not appropriate. And it's not probably practical to actually go out and say, look, we need to be 5s, unless you've got an enormous amount of time, money, and resource available to you. It's about practically getting to there. So something like geospatial might be something that would be great to get to, but it's not necessarily a 5. So it's practically rolling out where you are and where you need to get to. Something like semi-structured and unstructured data. You may have some data sets, you may have some video files and things that you practically aren't going to necessarily do something with those yet, but you might want to get to a level score of 3 where you can actually be storing those image files and things. So it's around understanding where you need to get to. How we do a session in this space is, and how we recommend it, is that you sit together around about 12 to 20 people in a session. we normally suggest that you get people from your reporting and analytics teams together, as well as business people and stakeholders, all together with different views across things. And within this Mike 2.0 system, there are definitions of what each of these areas around the spider chart are, and what high level a score of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 would be. And so it gives you a framework for that scoring. Then basically what you do is you sit down and you score these together. And what you find is that there'll be differences. Some of you will think, oh, data governance, we're actually a 2. Some others will think you're a 4. Some will think you're a 1. That opens up the chance for you to have an open discussion as you talk around why you think you're at different points in that journey. The point is that you're trying to understand those differences and those different points of view to come to then a consensus as to what your current state is and where you want to get to. And you can also have another line, which is a roadmap. We'd like to get there 1 year, 2 years, even 3 years from now. So this is a great session to have. Now, there's some great things out from that as well. One is it's a very repeatable process. You can do this on a regular basis. You can do this. Some of our customers, we do this with every 6 months. It gives them a point of being able to say, well, where have we got to on that journey? Some we do it every year, or maybe in a different frequency to that, quarterly, for example. If you do that, what's important to remember, I think, I've found, is to bring the same or very similar people to each of those scoring sessions. Because what you have is the ability to then, if you have the same people together, build on that same scoring that you had last time to really give that sort of growth from it. If you bring different people each time and they all have different scoring, you don't even know if the change in your score from current state from last time is because necessarily you've grown or regressed, or that they've just scored differently. So it's important to bring those same people along to it. Now, also in this picture, it gives you this appearance that all of these things have equal weight to them, that building on data quality is the same as building on unstructured data. And that's not necessarily true. They all do have a sort of a structure to them. And so some of those things are now, we've represented here in this different pictorial that sort of shows some of those technology pieces that were on the left-hand side of the spider chart are here on the bottom. They're around those platforming pieces that build that core engine up, that data platform, making sure you've got your data streaming, your databases there. On top of it, you've got your management and your integration of data across those, cataloging it all. Then you're getting the value out of it. But all of that has to come from tying up to your strategy, so as an organization, and then down through the governance and making sure you've got the right people there with the ownership of things and making the right decisions, and the culture around doing data in the right way. They all have different weight and they all actually interlace, but it's important that you've got to have that top-down elements to it as well, so that you are driving towards a common good. The yellow ones are more of those process pieces and the people parts, while the green ones are more of those technology-driven pieces that support the process and the people as you go up towards the strategy. And of course, those governance and strategy parts, they're the ones who have the authority of driving the decisions around that capability that comes from the ones below. But that all then calls back to that matrix, which all of those pieces have a place. And it's really important to understand where you're going along that, and to make sure you're doing the right thing, of course. What's important to do is also to make sure that you've got some element of voice for all of these in there. So for example, data quality, it's important to get people who are using the data, who can give you a gauge on what the impact of having poor data is having on them, as well as the people who support the data in terms of inputting data, so they can describe some of the problems they have around entering data and maintaining some of that data, so that you've got both sides of that question in there, as well as people doing the analytics and the reporting to say what the problems are when data quality issues manifest up into the analytics side of things. So then, what we then find is when you then roll this out and you've got your journey mapped, And by mapping your journey, sorry, just to go back one, what you're doing is you're taking that session where everyone, the 12 to 20 people have come, you've had the consensus and you've had the discussions around this consensus sessions around one person scored a 1, one person scored a 3, debating where they are, you average it all out, and you come with that current state to future state elements. What it's then we've found practically important to then look at today is to make sure that you're looking at what elements of that are in that mode 1, sort of that centralized team, driving, well-structured data and analytics, traditionally through more of a data warehouse or maybe a data lake in more conformed ways. And then what parts are going to be played by more of that mode 2 part, more of that self-service, business-driven, exploratory piece, more in that AI and analytics space, and which pieces are done by both, because that gives you a structure for what next steps could look like in both of those pieces to support the growth on your chart, on your spider chart. So then what we typically do is then we look at what your next steps would be for each of those particular areas. For us, we can't help you determine what is we can help you determine, but we can't be the ones who determine the priority of these things. Some of these things are more obvious as a higher priority by the gap between your current state and where you want to get to. Some of them are much more driven by the realities of your current state. Your data quality might be really important for you to get, but you might have a program of work in 6 months' time which is going to address that. So let's not necessarily look at doing anything before that as much. You know, you want to tie in your realities here, prioritize which pieces, and then what we find effective is sitting down with you and working through, or you can do it yourself, of course, working through what your short, medium, and long-term steps are in building up your capability across each of these particular areas. Of course, Altis has got a number of frameworks to help you on that growth and support that delivery of that, of course. But in each of these, it's important to highlight what those steps are. Even on the lower priority ones, we find it's important to do that, because even on those, what you find is over time, things can change. You might find that data quality was not a problem before because some of your core tenets like customer and product data was okay. And it was actually okay for you to do business. But then suddenly there's been a change. COVID hit, for example, and you've got to then look at some other data to drive some decisions. And that data is now suddenly not as good to support really good outcomes. And so you need to refocus on there. And if you've already got those short, medium, and long-term steps on how do you build that data quality, it's really easy to change tack fast and be more agile in your approach to how you work on your roadmap. These things, and in this case, we were more Microsoft focused on our outcomes, just to give you a bit of flavor, but this can easily be AWS or on-prem, of course. And they're all not all technology focused, but the ones in different areas were a bit more technology focused. And the important piece is, though, that you're understanding where some elements have technology, where some are process and things, and where you can easily roll these out. We then find what this is able to nicely do is feed into your roadmap of activities. You can actually then time box activities here and really see where you need to allocate resource or where you need to actually grow capabilities within your team to support those long-term activities. Now, what's also important here to highlight is that not all of these things have to be done through the Mike 2.0 open source or through the Microsoft maturity curve. As I said, for example, we, Altis, of course, have our own maturity assessment survey. It's up on our website. It's another mechanism for doing the same thing. We've actually, the Mike 2.0 we found some areas where it could be strengthened. And so we've applied what we've seen in the market across a number of customers to our own survey. which is a free survey that you can easily do online, and it can be repeated as well to grow your gauge in the same way. It's a fantastic tool. All of these things we find are easy, practical ways to assess where you are current state, where you need to get to, give a holistic view of that spider chart, which is, I think, is one of the most powerful pieces. And it's in a presentable form, which is so easy to then communicate to people across the different business. You can talk to executives, stakeholders, steering committees, down through people within the organisations in the different business units. And it's very easy for them to then see where they are today, where they need to grow to, what the steps are to get there. And it's then much easier for them to cross-communicate and share stories along that to make sure that you're getting in common direction. All right, so I think that's it. That's it for my session. Let's see, let's go up to the Q&A. Any Q&A questions? No open questions. I don't know if that's a good thing. I'm sure that's probably a good sign that you've enjoyed the session and got so much out of the session that it's there. We are going to be recording. This session has been recorded, which means that at some point in the near couple of days, a YouTube video with this terrible voice is going to be saved and shorts able to be shared, and I'll be able to send those out to people. But thank you so much for your time. Have a lovely day, and I'll talk to you later.